Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, the battle for the South China Sea. Just who owns what in the world's busiest shipping lane and what's below the surface that's caused a bunch of recent spats. Also, corruption and bribery in the beautiful game. We look at the crisis at the heart of FIFA and how it fixes its reputation. And protecting the rainforests. We're in Indonesia as the environment and business collide, as they so often do. But first to the South China Sea, perhaps a bit of a misnomer in the context of what we're talking about this week, because we've also got Vietnam, the Philippines, Brunei, Taiwan and Malaysia all making claims to it as well. And wouldn't you know it, there is a classic reason for all the tension: the rights to vast amounts of oil and gas. According to China's estimates cited by the US Energy Information Agency, there could be 213 billion barrels of oil there, which would propel China to second in the League of Nations with the most proven oil reserves, behind only Saudi Arabia, of course, with 264 billion barrels. But more than that, the most abundant hydrocarbon in the sea is natural gas, estimated at 2 quadrillion cubic feet of the stuff. So clearly, he who owns these fields could easily transform economies and help reduce dependency on oil and gas imports. Remember, oil's still at more than $100 a barrel these days. But let's make a bit of a correlation here. You've got the fight for territory rights, the oil beneath that territory, and the growing tensions in the region, and it's manifesting itself in a massive build-up of military and navy capabilities. For example, Vietnam's agreed to buy 6 Kilo-class diesel-electric submarines for about $2 billion. Thailand's spending $30 billion over the next 10 years on submarines, anti-submarine helicopters and fighter planes. And the Philippines is considering buying its first submarine after earlier this year spending almost $100 million on a Hamilton-class ship from the US Coast Guard. And all this is just a small snapshot of the deals being done. It is a fascinating battle. We're going to begin with this from Florence Louis, which explains the area we're talking about, the disputes and the big moves, especially by China, to secure the area.
Yet another example of China's thirst for resources. Dubbed Ocean Petroleum 981, this offshore oil rig is able to explore in waters as deep as 3,000 meters. That's 6 times more than the country's previous capabilities. Exploration work will start in July. The platform is being deployed to the South China Sea, but China is not revealing its exact location just yet, and that has caused concern among its neighbors.
Under international maritime law, each state has the right to exploit and manage an area up to 200 nautical miles from its coast. That's known as the exclusive economic zone, and that's what this blue dotted line represents. But take a look at China's claim. It extends far beyond its southernmost coastline, covering almost the entire South China Sea, an area that's estimated to hold rich deposits of oil and gas.
The Philippines on Wednesday summoned the Chinese ambassador and demanded to know where China's mega oil rig would be placed after Chinese vessels were allegedly seen in Philippine waters last month. China has denied the allegations. Just a week ago, there was a confrontation some 100 nautical miles off the Vietnamese coast. Vietnam accused Chinese patrol boats of harassing its vessels and of deliberately cutting cables belonging to a Petro-Vietnam ship. China said it acted within its rights.
We're calling on the Vietnamese to immediately stop activities that infringe Chinese rights so as not to cause any disturbance.
While China has never disguised its ambitious claims over the South China Sea, experts say Beijing has shown an increased willingness to defend what it deems to be its territorial waters.
The almost complete absence of conflict management or conflict avoidance mechanisms between China and the Southeast Asian claimants raises the prospect of an accidental confrontation at sea.
But any negotiations with China will now have to take into account not only its economic dominance, but also its rising military influence.
All right, let's talk more about these South China Sea's tensions with Richard Bitzinger. He's a senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Richard, thank you for your time. Let's deal with China's claim, first of all, because as we've seen on our map, it is trying to take up a lot more room than everyone else's 200 miles. Does it have any real claim to that area, do you think?
Well, not really, no. Ironically, that claim was actually made during the nationalist rule between 1945 and 1949, when they still controlled China. And that was essentially an informal declaration that I don't even think was made by the government at that time. But the Chinese have sort of latched on to that. They're not actually saying that they claim that. That is, that's their territorial waters or even their exclusive economic zone. What they're more talking about, rather ambiguously, but also rather more ominously, is about having sovereignty control over the South China Sea. And that's actually causing more problems than anything.
Is it just trying to outmuscle, basically, and show we're the biggest power, we've got the most military might, we've got the most money, we can do this?
I think that's part of it, and I think there's also a feeling that, claim as much as you can, and then you can negotiate backwards. At this point, everybody's kind of doing that, though.
How much do you think any one country could actually do with this? If they all sort of stuck to their own actual claims, I'm thinking the economic effects could be really quite strong of actually tapping into this and doing something with the money.
Well, in the first place, there's so many overlapping claims at this point that essentially one of the problems is exploration, particularly oil and gas exploration, just simply can't happen because most oil companies will not go in and start to explore a territory if there is a lot of conflict going on. They want to make sure that the countries that they're dealing with have all their ducks in a row first. So in a sense, these guys are all kind of blocking each other at this point, at least when it comes to something like oil and gas exploration.
So is there any prospect, you sort of preempted my next question, but is there any prospect of them working together? The whole thing kind of reminds me of the situation in the Arctic, where you've got, I think it's maybe 7 countries or something, trying to carve up the territory of the Arctic, and they meet every now and then and they try to hash it out. Any chance of that happening here?
Well, it's always possible. Actually, one of the really interesting developments over the last couple of years was that Norway and Russia, which had been fighting over who owned what in the North China or North Sea, above them in the Arctic, actually came to an agreement that was pretty good for both of them. And so it's not impossible for these countries to work something out. It's just that it's most likely going to have to be something that will be worked out multilaterally. And the problem with that, of course, is that exponentially every new member you throw into that negotiating mix is going to make things harder. Plus, the Chinese insist on that everything has to be done bilaterally. So I'm not saying they can't do it. And in fact, I think certain countries, particularly probably Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, could probably come to some agreements. Like I say, the big problem, of course, is China, and if it persists in these rather ambiguous claims.
So what about an outside mediator almost, either an Asian body, an ASEAN or something like that, or even, say, the United States coming in as almost a mediator trying to sort this out?
Well, I'm certain you'd find either some country or organization that'd be willing to mediate, but like I say, the first step is that all the parties have to agree to some type of mediation. At this point, we're far long a ways from that. The only good thing is at this point, this hasn't degenerated into a real major kind of warring going on between any of the parties.
But, as we've pointed out, there is a big military build-up as well, and again, it's China that's leading it, but you've even got the other countries, the Vietnams, the Philippines, looking at beefing up their military capabilities as well. What do you make of that?
Well, obviously, one piece of that military buildup on the part of China, for example, but especially, as you pointed out, in Vietnam and maybe the Philippines, is this idea of basically bolstering your claim over the region by basically bolstering your ability to assert your sovereignty in the region. With China, they kind of get multiple benefits from their military buildup because, obviously, I'd say first and foremost, their military buildup is directed against Taiwan, and then probably secondly in the South China Sea. But in general, this fits into the Chinese pattern of becoming first a regional military power of note, and then perhaps down the road, one that's global, or certainly a Pacific Indian Ocean ranging power.
Richard Bitzinger joining us from Singapore this week on Counting the Cost. Thank you.
Thank you.
And still ahead this week on Counting the Cost, lunar landscapes on Earth. This is Indonesia, where the rainforests are proving a curse rather than a blessing. We'll look at the clash between business and environment a little later. Right now, though, football, a colossus money-making juggernaut with one organisation, or is it a monopoly, which stands to benefit the most? FIFA has been all over the news in the last week with its so-called presidential election and allegations of bribery and corruption. In the end, though, it is the paymaster to 200-plus regional and local associations, so not only does it pay these smaller groups, but relies on them for votes and therefore power. So we've opened up FIFA's 2010 financial report for a bit of scrutiny. Joanna Gajarowska is at the video wall right now with all the numbers.
Kamal, two things to remember here. One, FIFA is officially a non-profit organisation, but it is run like a corporation. So there's already a clash of ideas there. And two, 2010 was a World Cup year, and with FIFA owning the marketing rights, there's a whole lot of money to be made there. So here are the numbers. FIFA ended the 2007-2010 period with $631 million. A corporation would call this profit, but FIFA calls it results. Its reserves ballooned to $1.28 billion, a massive boost from 2003 when it had reserves of just $76 million. And total revenue was more than $4 billion. But where does that all come from? Well, first and foremost, it's the sale of television rights, again, mostly from the World Cup. It brought in almost $2.5 billion. Then more than $1 billion comes from marketing rights. That's the money that's paid by sponsors, and there's big names involved there, like Coke, Adidas and Emirates. But watch where and how the money goes out. $1.7 billion was spent on the World Cup and other events. Of that, $348 million was spent on prize money. And then another $794 million went on development projects. But how much tax did FIFA pay in 2010? Well, here is where it gets interesting. Only $898,000. That's the benefit of incorporating in Switzerland and being a non-profit organisation. And think about wages and salaries too. For 2010, they came in at $77.4 million. But with just 387 employees in 2010, that's an average of about $200,000 for each employee. Now, of course, your humble secretary is not going to get that, but there's nothing in the account to say what the top executives receive, something publicly traded companies just couldn't get away with. So, Kamal, from what we see, FIFA is doing everything by the book, but it's the interpretation of that book and the alleged missing pages which have got everyone concerned right now.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you for that, Joe. And of course, it goes beyond just numbers. The backstory at FIFA is one of accountability and also now its reputation. Let's talk more about that with Bernhard Bauhofer, who's the founder and director of reputation management and PR company Sparring Partners. He's in Zurich for us, which was pretty much the centre of the world for the last week while all this was going on. It seems like FIFA wants to keep everything in-house at the moment, when really it's almost run like a corporation. It should be answerable to all sorts of people.
Yes, absolutely. It's quite an opaque organization in the worldwide trend towards transparency and modern management and governance. FIFA isn't up to date. It's run like a family company, but we know that there are successful, honorable family companies, but there are also mafia-like organizations. So I think it's now really time for FIFA to show modern management governance and really take care of the companies and organizations' reputation, as well as the reputation of the football and the reputation of Switzerland.
Why do you think it's been so reluctant to modernise in that sense then? Because, as I said before, it is effectively a business. Certainly when you've got sponsors, the likes of Emirates and Visa and Coke and Adidas, big names putting money in, it is a business, and yet it doesn't almost behave like one.
Well, it has been very comfortable in a grey zone between the public sector and the private sector. It has been benefiting from both sides. There hasn't been too much pressure on the status quo and the organizational structure of FIFA, as many people are benefiting from this structure. So the situation is that the only chance to move on, to modernize the organization, is that really the big sponsors who are under lots of pressure in terms of governance themselves are putting the pressure towards FIFA to not have a negative reputational impact by FIFA on their own brand.
And are they right to be angry, do you think? Because it's been interesting seeing official statements coming out from all these sponsors one after one expressing their displeasure at the whole situation.
Well, there's a peer pressure, of course. I think Coca-Cola has made the lead. It's important that big names are now really taking care of their own reputation, and they are asking for the ROI on their investments, and big challenges and danger is that in the next games, the negative reputation of FIFA will put the negative impetus on the sponsors, and I think that's the only way to make this organization move towards modernization and reform, because neither the government nor any other stakeholders are capable of putting this pressure on FIFA.
What about the Swiss officials or Swiss government? The fact that FIFA is based there, it's able to pay a lot less tax. But FIFA is an international brand. It's not a Swiss company. It's a very, very much an international brand. Has it got something to answer to there, or can it play a role in modernising?
Well, over years, although the government and the state has been very proud of being home to international organizations like the IOC or FIFA, as they were drawing positive attention towards the country. Now we're seeing the negative side of this neutrality, of this secretiveness, of this kind of organization, especially after the financial crisis, where we put big pressure on UBS and the financial institutions. Now it's time for the government to really show responsibility and just change the unfair situation of tax privileges to elitist groups like FIFA is, or even individuals, high net worth individuals from the world. So now we're hearing from this government side, and that they are really discussing this heavily as a consequence of pressures from outside, especially from UK and the global community.
Bernard, you work in reputation management, public relations. What would be the one major thing you would advise FIFA? If you could advise them directly, what would you say? Well,
there has to be a transformation of the culture of FIFA. There has to be implemented a clear government. There has to be external control. The Ethical Commission was heavily criticized, and I think that was right so, because there's no control from inside. Then there has to be a really concern about the externalities of the company. We know that FIFA has built large stadiums with tax money in South Africa. Now these are abandoned. Their external costs, they are not reflected in the balance sheet of FIFA. Communication has to improve. A crisis was neglected. There was a heavy crisis, but it was neglected by the president. Corporate social responsibility is a big issue. Corporate citizenship, all these reputational drivers have to be clearly implemented into the management style of FIFA, and by the chance, over time, there has to be transformed. We have to see a transformation of the culture.
Bernard Bauhofer joining us from Zurich, talking FIFA. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, let's take you around the rest of the world now, starting in Indonesia, where a 2-year government ban on rainforest logging is facing challenges. And like in our look at FIFA, it's talk of bribery and corruption which is jeopardising the situation. There are plans to save 65 million hectares of jungle, half of the country's forest cover. But will that happen? Step Varson has more from Borneo.
These are images Indonesia wants the world to see. Lush rainforest still intact. But this is how Borneo, or Kalimantan as Indonesia calls it, really looks like. We secretly filmed coal mining in an area that was supposed to be protected. The company is legally destroying the forest since government officials simply gave them a license to do so. Most likely in return for a stiff bribe, according to environmentalists. Something that's common practice, proven by the amount of cases brought to court.
The president's decision to ban logging is far too late for Kalimantan because most of Kalimantan is already divided between mining companies and palm oil plantations.
Indonesia at the forefront of the battle against climate change. But this is the reality on the ground. Most of the so-called lungs of the world have been destroyed already. And what's left will be hard to be protected against business interests and corrupt officials. The government will receive $1 billion from Norway now that it signed the 2-year logging ban. Indonesia refutes criticism. The ban is only symbolic.
That Indonesia would like to achieve a 7% growth without harming these 60 million hectares of primary forest. Can we do it? Yes. And we can also reduce emissions significantly. We will have, actually, from combating fire and maintaining peatland, we will already achieve more than 30% of our emissions.
Looking from the sky, this is hard to believe. Mining companies are legally bound to restore the forest, but what they leave behind is a moon landscape. Since the introduction of regional autonomy, the government in Jakarta is often overpowered by local authorities, who are not keen to enforce the logging ban. In this district in East Kalimantan alone, more than 700 mining permits have been requested. Hundreds have been issued already. The district chief admits corruption has been a problem.
Mereka salah memberikan izin.
Officials wrongly handed out permits. They've handed out permits in protected forest, so they didn't treat the forest in a proper way, but gave it away for mining or plantations. And this happened a lot. Well, I don't mean a lot, but it has happened, and I was informed that the law had been violated.
The district chief says that under her rule this won't happen again. But environmentalists fear, with new corruption cases being detected throughout Borneo, the remaining rainforest could very well be up for sale.
To Belarus now, which has appealed to the International Monetary Fund for a bailout of up to $8 billion. Not nearly as big as the Greek, Irish and Portuguese bailouts, but think about these things. The currency is rapidly devaluing. The government's imposed a price freeze on basic foods until July. It all means, as you'll see in this report from Neve Barker, that Belarusians are feeling the squeeze of an unravelling economy.
For Luda Shostak, shopping isn't what it used to be. With the economy in free fall, she's left counting the cost.
My friends told me that they don't want to go to shops anymore, just like, you know. What I've noticed is that everybody starts talking just about that, just about prices.
These shelves may look full, but that's because President Alexander Lukashenko ordered shops to find ways to fill them. But Belarusians aren't deceived.
The salary stays the same. It's not like it's rising with prices, and people who have salary in Belarusian rubles, they try to spend it somehow.
People are handling the crisis in different ways. Some have bought items they think will keep their value. This electronics store is rapidly running out of stock. Others rush to change their plummeting rubles for other more stable currencies, but now there's a serious shortage.
You get a real sense of the precariousness of the situation here in Belarus when you try to exchange Belarusian rubles for dollars. Officially, national reserves have fallen below $3 billion, and that's a conservative estimate. It's forced some money exchangers to close their doors altogether. In the past, you used to be able to withdraw dollars from bank machines like this. But here, as you can see, the dollars button doesn't even work.
There's now a growing black market, providing better exchange rates than banks. Belarus hasn't seen a currency crisis like this since the collapse of the Soviet Union, when thousands were left impoverished. Some economists say a similar meltdown's around the corner.
For the people of Belarus, the main option is to tighten their belts. So for them, there's going to be a hard time, and I think they probably should do some peaceful demonstration requesting removal of Lukashenko.
The president hopes a bailout of up to $8 billion from the International Monetary Fund will keep the country afloat. Russia's already promised at least $3 billion, but much more is needed. Selling off state assets looks like the best way of avoiding certain disaster.
That's about our lot for this week. Don't forget Counting the Cost online, though. You start at the main page at aljazeera.net/English. Hit the business tab at the top. Then head to the Counting the Cost section where we put all our episodes up in full for you to catch up on when you want. And then when you want to get in touch, head to Twitter, search for me at KamalAJE, where I post regular updates on the show. Do get in touch because we really do like to hear from you, get your thoughts on the show. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.